the Synchronicity of Maniacs. Oh, I feel like I may have just talked about this recently, but I don't think so. I think it's more like I'd meant to talk about it, and I had it in my mind, and it just didn't come out. That's why it's still in there. Once you get it out, it's on you now. It's not mine anymore. It's up to you to decide what it is that offends you. I say, what's the show about? I say, it's got something for everyone to hate. So yeah, it's just a thought. It's not even a belief. What's a belief good for? 10% of your fucking paycheck. But I realize, I think it was meant to be right there in with, you might be surprised sometimes by the things that happen. And that's one I did last week. And this was about my uncles, these savages out in the wild and their army, as I said they should have one. And this is like a part two. It was a part of it, but they really something, my mom's brothers, and I know about them because I'd been to Paul's Pub in Joburg a few times. Johannesburg. Isn't that funny? That's the name of the town. My mom was the queen of Johannesburg. She was the beauty queen when she was a girl. And she never got murdered or stolen because she had old Jack down the road protecting her. Happy. But there was a crime there once committed where a guy killed a cop and then all the way down to Georgia and the cops down there, they finally got him. He stole cars on the way down. A friend of mine picked him up hitchhiking that night before he killed the cop, and they found this guy in a barn in Georgia, and they said that he came at him with a pitchfork, and they said pop 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 pop. He had a pitchfork. Yeah, there's a pitchfork they could put down there, but I bet you if they did trajectory, it wouldn't have been like a guy going It wouldn't have landed in the same place as they put it, I'm sure of it. It was probably still in his hands. Just put it in his hands, it makes it more believable. And his name was Joel Paul Hanna. And I find it interesting that he killed that cop in Johannesburg. And so it's like, did they name Johannesburg for this guy before he ever came around? Joel Paul Hannesburg? Johannesburg. Joe, hey Joe. Johanna, look, you know my brother. But yeah. So one time I end up out in Paul's Pub at one afternoon, a gray day like this, stony cold sky, but just beautiful, 40 degrees. It was something like that, maybe a little bit warmer, I don't know. And it was right at the time that woman drove down M32 where that curve comes around as you pass right past the B and all this stuff. And the old Depot restaurant is right there on the curve. This woman came through, didn't even bother slowing down for the curve, went straight through the old Depot, killed 5 to 8 people, and it's like, oh, siete. Yeah, I know, we didn't know them, but, so I am in Paul's Pub, and the news crew is there to cover this terrible thing that happened. And they're in there having lunch. The news van's outside. I saw them talking, doing the news story in front of the depot. You're right. And then they came in. And I don't know if they drank beer or not. I didn't notice. I know they were having lunch, and they were sitting over there, and they were laughing and giggling and talking and having a good old time after 5 or 8 people died, and they just acted very serious out in public. And I'm sitting there looking at them and watching them and thinking, you fucking vultures. You fucking vultures. You're just here for a paycheck. Not just that, but you're here to show everybody. And at that point, this guy sitting on the other side of the bar, around the bar there, he's watching me, watching them. I guess he's seeing me thinking. And he says, without saying hello or anything, he just says, you know, you've got the look of a Moore boy. And I turn around and I see, yeah, Ginjo Road. Tell him my mom's name. And he's like, yeah. And he says, same thing that I've heard every other time I've been in there and somebody said, you've got the look of a Moore. He says that they always talk about my uncles. That always comes up. And so this is the first time I ever realized that this is not just a fluke. This is a town that was petrified of my uncles. Just like Gaylord, kind of the idea that you don't kill anybody you don't know. And if people are friendly to you, then there's no reason to beat the shit out of them. But then this guy, as I'm realizing this is a recurring thing, people always recognize me because I've got the look of my mother. And then they go on to name 3 of my uncles' names. And if they hadn't named the names, I could have guessed who they were to begin with just by the attitudes. And they say, they were just, wow. They would be in the bar and they'd start something with somebody. One of them would start something with somebody, and the guy, and a fight would start, and all 3 of them would be in it, just beating it. They said they were just brutal and inhuman. That's where I come from. There's siete. But the thing about that, having heard it enough times, there I am in Kalamazoo, and there was this guy who used to walk up and down the streets, and he'd be getting work with people that were doing work on something. He'd come up and he'd talk to them, and he'd end up doing some work for him or something. And I knew some of the neighbors, and he was over at their place one day when I happened to be there, and I was like, And I talked to him a few times before then. And then here he is talking about doing coke with a whore and how slick he talked in the back of that car. I'm sitting there thinking, how slick do you have to be with a whore? You paid her. This is a boring story. She doesn't like you. It's like every one of your stories. Nobody's ever liked you. So I despised him. And there I am one day. I'm on the porch, and he's coming up the steps. He comes up, and I jumped up and I mentioned this in Where Have All the Jehovah's Witnesses Gone? About the Jehovah's Witnesses coming up the steps behind me, and I'm saying I've fucking told people, and this guy, he's about a quarter of the way up the steps, and I stood up and I said, stop. And he's like, oh, and he's still coming, and I said, stop. And he said, blah, blah, blah. And I said, if you don't stop right now, I'm going to kick your ass down those stairs. See? Not welcome. I didn't invite this fucker. And then he stopped. And he said, and I came down about a quarter, and I'm like, what? And he's like, and he just wanted to talk. Next thing you know, he finds out I'm from Gaylord, and he says, oh yeah, I spent some time up that way. I was in Johannesburg once. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah. He says, I was in Paul's pub. And I said, yeah. And he says, and I was talking to this girl, and it looked like everything was going to work out all right. And then these 3 guys got up, and they dragged me out. It could have been my sister. They dragged me out into the parking lot and just beat me and beat me and beat me so bad that finally the cops showed up. And they were already gone, and they wanted to take me to the hospital, but I didn't want to go to the hospital. I didn't want to go with the cops. And I'm like, and I said, and I can almost guarantee this. It was my uncles that beat the living shit. And I said it. I said, those were my uncles. And he said, huh? And, there's some credit to stay off the fucking stairs. I did. I said, those were my uncles. And I laughed because I know it was my uncles. I know my uncles, the Gingell boys. They beat the living fuck out of this guy before I ever had a chance to. And they made everything okay because he didn't bother with me anymore after that. That synchronicity. And ever after, I'd watch him walking by in the street. He'd always have a tank top, and he had this tumorous arm. It was his right arm, which is probably his dominant arm. He had this gangrenous thing from Fantastic Four arm. It was all fucked up, and he'd be walking around, and I'd sit there and I'd think, maybe you can beat somebody so bad that it debilitates their chromosomes for fighting. Maybe they just took his fighting hand away. Oh, my uncles. Synchronicity, baby. Nothing like having somebody take care of something for you.